This week on Let's Talk About Mental Health, I'm talking about how your mindset affects your mental health. So let's get talking. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and well-being, hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 31 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast about improving your mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin. Thank you for joining me. This week I'm talking about mindset. I'll be discussing how the way you look at things impacts on your mental health. So, let's talk. How you think about yourself and the world around you has a huge impact on how you experience this thing that we call life. Do you believe that you're a victim of fate, or do you believe that you're the one in the driver's seat, and that it's up to you to navigate your way through the obstacles that are inevitably thrown our way? There's that saying that's been floating around in one form or another for quite a while: if you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always gotten. It's been incorrectly attributed to everyone from Henry Ford to Tony Robbins. It's actually believed to have been first said by a woman called Jessie Potter back in 1981, speaking at a conference. But anyway, the point of that saying, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always gotten, the same notion applies to your mindset. If you always think the way that you've always thought, then you'll end up with the same patterns emerging time and time again. And so if that's happening, then you have the option of changing your situation by changing your mindset, which takes time and effort, like everything, but which can also completely change your life for the better. So let's start by defining the word mindset. The term mindset refers to your attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs, both about yourself and about the greater world. For example, do you think that the world is a scary place, or is it a place where both good and not so good things happen? How you think about things will have a direct impact on your outlook, and the person who looks at things as always being terrible is going to have a very different experience than the one who looks at things in a more positive light. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Having a positive mindset does not mean that you just stick your head in the sand and pretend that everything's rosy, even when the world is on fire. Nor does it mean that you believe that everything is always unicorns, rainbows, and Care Bears, and so you never have any problems. Far from it. What it means is that you believe that things can and will improve, even when bad things are happening. For those of us who deal with mental health challenges, adopting a positive mindset has been demonstrated to have a direct influence on the severity and duration of symptoms for conditions such as anxiety and depression. For example, in a 2001 paper by Jacobson and Greenlee called What is Recovery, there were a number of internal factors that are noted to be effective in aiding the recovery process, including hope, a focus on healing rather than illness, empowerment, and connection. Now, they all combine with external factors, including human rights, a positive culture of healing, and recovery-oriented services. And I'll put the link to that paper in the transcript on the website. Let's talk about that mindset notion, looking at a current example. Let's talk about the incredible protests and riots that have been happening in the USA and around the world in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Someone with a negative mindset might look at that and not understand it, or they might see it as being a waste of time, because they might think that change just is not possible. Whereas someone with a positive mindset would believe that every single person deserves equality, and that each of us can, indeed, contribute to change, even if it's just in some small way. And so even though things won't change overnight, and even though the going will probably be tough, as it has been for so many major changes throughout history, someone with a positive mindset believes that positive change can happen, and it will happen. Now, when we talk about mindset, we also need to talk about values and beliefs. And your values and beliefs are directly linked to your mindset, because they are the foundation of how you view the world and your place in it. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to believe or what your values should be. That's up to you. But I have said time and time again in this podcast that being fair and focusing on equality for all is directly linked to good mental health and well-being, because it all ties into being kind to yourself and to others, and doing no harm to yourself or to others. That paper by Jacobson and Greenlee that I mentioned earlier talks about human rights as having a direct impact on the potential for recovery from mental health challenges. And in this case, human rights are defined as, I quote, a vision of a society in which power and resources are distributed equitably. Now, let me just read one specific paragraph that I think makes a quite important point and brings all this stuff together. When applied to mental illness, human rights emphasizes reducing and then eliminating stigma and discrimination against persons with psychiatric disabilities. And I'll include a link again to that paper in the transcript. And if you apply that notion to mindset, can you imagine what the world would be like if we focused all of our energy on reducing and then eliminating stigma and discrimination? Not just towards those of us who are dealing with mental health challenges, but for everybody. You might be asking yourself why I bring this sort of stuff up all the time in a podcast about improving your mental health and well-being. Well, let me tell you why. No single person is better than another. I don't care what color your skin is, or who you sleep with, or how you identify in terms of gender or religion or nationality or creed, we are all the same on the inside. And when we allow ourselves to believe that one group is better than another for whatever reason, we do harm to the world and we do harm to ourselves. When you focus your time and energy on being a decent person, one who accepts all people for the individuals they are, one who emphasizes kindness and respect for all, you are then putting out positive energy, and what you put out comes back to you. And also, let's be blunt, it takes a lot of effort to be a hate-mongering asshole. And quite frankly, it's a wiser choice to be on the right side of history. If you choose to maintain a positive and understanding mindset, one that doesn't just tolerate differences, but that actually embraces every person's uniqueness, then you are going to have much more positive experiences in this world. And that has a direct impact on your mental health and well-being. And that's why I keep talking about this stuff, and will keep talking about this stuff as well. Back in episode 30, I mentioned that you are able to choose your mindset, and I just want to talk about that notion for a bit. I know as well as anybody how hard it is to just choose to be happy. Actually, it's more like pretty damn difficult, or nearly impossible, depending on the day. But you really can choose to be optimistic and look for the positives, even when you're feeling terrible. You can choose to believe that things can and will get better. And so then on those days where perhaps you're finding it difficult to push through the horrible feelings, you have the knowledge that it's not permanent, and that knowledge will help to anchor you. One of the most common discussions around mindset is fixed versus a growth mindset. Now, what that means is a fixed mindset refers to when you believe that specific traits or abilities are fixed at birth, whereas someone with a growth mindset believes that brains and talent are just the starting point. They believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Now, back when I worked in the corporate sector, my leadership approach was underpinned by the fundamental belief that skill was far less important than will. In other words, I believe, and I still do to this day, anyone can be trained to do pretty much anything with enough time and resources. But if they don't have the will or the desire to do something, then it will never work. Now, a lot of that was driven by my experience as working as a trainer before I moved into management, but I stand by that notion. And I can definitely say that anytime I ever took disciplinary action against someone at work, it was because of attitude rather than aptitude. When we talk about mindset, Henry Ford said it best in his famous quote, "If you think you can do a thing or think you can't do a thing, you're right." And so much of what we do or don't do comes down to our predominant mindset. There is no right or wrong mindset or personality type, but it is important to be fully aware of what impacts your mindset can have on your mental health and well-being. If you have a negative mindset, you'll be much more likely to point the finger of blame at circumstances or at other people, rather than seeking to understand what is your part in it, what's within your control, and then being able to learn the lessons that you need to learn and then make the changes where you're able to. When it comes to life, you are never powerless to take action, no matter how small. And so the risk of a negative mindset becomes the whole throwing your hands up in the air thing, if you know what I mean. And the risk is around treating events as happening to you rather than happening around you. It's the difference between reacting versus responding. And I've talked about this in previous episodes, like episode 28, Feelings. Reacting is quick and instinctive, whereas to respond is to take time to process what's happening, consider both the emotional and the rational side of your reaction, and then proceed in a considered and thoughtful manner. One approach is quite likely to come back and bite you on the backside later, whereas the other approach, responding, gives you time to be thoughtful about the consequences of the words or actions that you choose. This idea of fixed versus growth mindset it's available in quite a lot of stuff. There's a resource from Reach Out Australia that I'll include a link to in the transcript that describes it quite well. And I'm going to quote, so someone with a fixed mindset is likely to not deal very well with setbacks, try to hide their mistakes, believe that their abilities are limited to one area, engage in negative self-talk by saying things like, I can't do it, and avoid challenges. Whereas someone with a growth mindset is likely to welcome challenges and new things, learn from the people around them, understand that in order to get what they want, they've got to work hard, recognize failure as an opportunity to learn, and acknowledge their own weaknesses and focus on improving them. So here's how this whole thing applies to mental health, at least in my opinion. You might have hopefully noticed throughout Let's Talk About Mental Health that I limit the amount of times I mention the term mental illness, and instead I talk about mental health challenges. And there's a really good reason for that. It's like when I used to train people in the corporate world, I mentioned that before. Another trainer once taught me that instead of asking, are there any questions, to which I guarantee you the answer will be no 99% of the time, I could try asking, what questions are there, when I wanted to encourage questions and demonstrate that it's okay to ask for clarification or deeper understanding if people needed it. Now, I loved that technique and I would use it a lot when I was facilitating. And the same thing applies to this sort of discussion about mental illness versus mental health. One is negative and closed, while the other is more optimistic and open. When I say the word illness, what does it conjure up for you? Let me guess. Images of sick people, perhaps in hospital, maybe struggling to breathe or move, or just being confined to their beds. Now, what about the word health? It's a much more positive word. It makes you think of strength and vitality and energy. Now add the word challenge to the word health. A challenge is something that can be overcome with time and effort and the right resources. And that is precisely why I'm talking about all of this in relation to mindset and mental health today. A challenge is an opportunity. It's for you to make of it what you will. Having a condition like anxiety or depression really is not the end of the world. Sure, it is shitty, but it's not the end of the world. With the right treatment and support, combined with time and effort, it is absolutely possible to get through these sorts of conditions. But if you're prone to a negative mindset, then it's going to be so much harder. Not impossible, but certainly much harder and much more painful than it needs to be. If you believe that your situation is completely out of your control and it cannot be improved, then you will end up with what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that will mean you'll create that reality. And so it will be out of your control and it will be unable to be improved. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that you can just magically wish your condition away. But what it does mean is that the way you look at things will then determine what choices you make and how those choices affect your condition. If you believe that you can influence your situation through healthy diet and exercise, limiting or stopping substance use, positive thinking, and practices like gratitude and mindfulness, then you can also focus on the things that are within your power, like getting help and professional support for dealing with your mental health challenges. No part of your personality or life is completely fixed. Everything can be changed with enough time and effort, and your mental health is no different. The danger of a fixed mindset or a negative one is that you can be prone to believe that you just don't need to learn new things, or that you can't ever possibly change. And that's just not true. Everyone can change if they want to. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, we shrink from change, yet is there anything that can come into being without it? And so with that in mind, let's talk about what to do to challenge your mindset. This is the how-to part of this week's episode. First of all, pretty much like I've been saying all episode, it is a choice, and one that you need to make many times a day. You don't just do an I dream of Jeannie blink and suddenly change everything in an instant. It takes making a conscious decision every single day to be positive and to focus on the positive, and then backing that choice up with your words, actions, and feelings. And then by extension, my next point is to actively look for the positives and treat negative stuff as an opportunity to grow instead of being something insurmountable. That doesn't mean that you just ignore the negative stuff, but instead you reframe those things. And then that serves to help you challenge yourself to push forward instead of just staying stuck where you are. Because without growth, you will stagnate. The next point is to employ positive self-talk. And if you are prone to using negative language with yourself or in general in conversation, modify your language to focus on the positive. So for example, instead of saying things like, I can't do it, you can change that by saying, I can't do it yet. So it's about reframing your language to focus more on the positive. If you are prone to using negative language and you are aware of that, ask your friends or family to point out if you're using those types of phrases to help just to keep you on track. And by extension of that, another point is to choose to give things a go instead of being defeated. So instead of just putting your hands up and saying this won't work, instead stop, pause, reflect, and say, what can I do? There's always something that you can do. Sometimes even no action is an action, if that makes sense. And that flows into my next point, which is to proactively learn and try new things. Say yes more often. Push yourself out of your comfort zone as often as you possibly can. And while you're doing that, if you are prone to perfectionism, let go of that stuff because being perfect is just not possible. And trying to be perfect actually stops us from learning. Now, I've talked a few times in the podcast about different techniques that can work for you around your mindset. Gratitude, mindfulness, journaling. These are all techniques that come up time and time again in the field of positive psychology that are shown to actually increase your level of positive thinking. Because when you're actively looking for things to be grateful for or to be mindful about, you tend to then start noticing more things. Continuing on from that point, consider spending some time thinking about the key areas of your life. Relationships, work, creativity, all of that stuff. And consider what is working for you well and what you feel has room for improvement. And then consider what's within your control to change and come up with 1 or 2 small ideas for each item. And then I would suggest that you select just one small change in one aspect of your life, make the change, commit to it, give it 100%, see how it goes, and then over time, bring in something else. You don't have to change everything overnight, and that's something I talked about in episode 29, Habits. I'm getting to a point I can't even remember my own episode numbers. But back in the Habits episode, I discussed how if you try to do too many things at once or bite off more than you can chew, you're going to be more prone to going backwards or having difficulty in succeeding. So just be mindful of that, but take the time to really look at those key areas of your life. I'd also encourage you to give yourself permission to think about things differently. Ask yourself how much of your identity and mindset are wrapped up in old ways of thinking. Take a look at your life from a different perspective. I mean, look, let's be honest here. You might find it difficult to let go of old opinions or beliefs because it will take you into unknown territory. But that is where opportunity awaits. Some other points about mindset include grounding yourself in realistic optimism. Things are as they are, and the past cannot be changed, only learned from. So ask yourself where to from here. When you're looking at yourself, change what you can, which is your words, actions, and feelings. And when you're looking at the external world, your relationships with others, your options are to either accept, influence it if you can, or to let go. The next point is choose to make kindness the foundation of your mindset. Be kind to yourself and others. Do no harm to yourself or others, and give more than you take from this world. And when it comes to dealing with people, having a positive mindset is not about excusing bad behavior or being a doormat. Instead, it's about putting your calmness first in all things. Ask yourself what's more important, drama or being right, or your own peace of mind, because the choice is always yours. And my final point is that when it comes to working through mindset and looking at different ways of thinking about things, give yourself time. Rome was not built in a day, so take things one day at a time. Because when we talk about mindset, what it all boils down to is this. Your mindset is your choice. So much of this life is about perception, and so how you choose to look at things will have an enormous impact on how you experience them. If you focus on the negative, then don't be surprised if that's what you see, left, right, and center, because when you're looking for it, it becomes much easier to find. The same can be said for positive thinking. The more you look for the positives in your life, the more you will find to be positive about. Of course, that doesn't mean that everything will be perfect just because you magically wish it to be. What it means is that when obstacles and difficulties inevitably come your way, and they will because not everything is within your control, you'll then be much more inclined to look for the lessons and how the situation or challenge can help you to grow, rather than being sucked down by the negative aspects of the situation. The choice is always yours, and the decisions that you make will have a direct impact on what happens next. So why not choose to look for the silver lining in things and give yourself a chance to grow? What you do next is entirely up to you, so choose wisely. That's nearly it for this week. Now, each week I like to share a quote about this week's topic and encourage you to take a few moments to reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is by the great Albert Einstein, and it is, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." Let me repeat that. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Alright, that's it for this week's episode. Next week, I'll be talking about letting go. I'll be talking about the importance of letting go of your past to improve your mental health and well-being, as well as sharing how you can work through letting go. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning in Australia and New Zealand, Sunday evening in the UK and Ireland, and Sunday afternoon in the US and Canada. You can find past episodes and additional content at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. That's letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. You can also find Let's Talk About Mental Health on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at LTA Mental Health. That's at LTA Mental Health. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice and tell someone that you know about the show, because word of mouth really helps new people to discover the program. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time.